Thank you, and first of all, thanks for having me. So ILR is, since 2019, is the competent authority as well as a single point of contact for the NIS Directive. So for all the sectors, basically, except for the financial part. So that means that we are competent authority for energy, transport, drinking water, health, and digital infrastructures, which means that we are in the implementation side of the NIS Directive so far.
From the regulatory side?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see whether we have Rayna back with us. Not yet. Okay. Then let me see with continue with you, Sheila. What's your view on the implementation of NIS? I mean, a lot of things have happened. We had GDPR, we had NIS, etc., etc., etc. And my impression is, from having spoken with people all around, that they have a little bit of feeling that, well, all these regulations basically add to the burden, but the question of the value added of such a regulation remains posed among SMEs specifically, because they are the tissue which basically is the health sector, so to speak, of our economy. If SMEs are fine, our economy is fine. So what is your perception? How did implementation of NIS go at the SME level?
Well, I think the major part is already done by getting some awareness on the topic of cybersecurity. I mean, because of all the digitalization, it becomes, of course, more and more important that also the data as well as the services are at some point secured. And even especially for small enterprises, it is important to raise awareness because there, as said, there are different sectors, like for instance, energy, drinking water. Some of them are already more digitalized than others. So it's important to raise awareness not only for the bigger parts of the system, but also for the smaller companies that are maybe not so much aware of all the threats that are out there. So I think NIS, foremost, what it did was already raising awareness. And of course, then comes all the security obligations, instant notifications. But for me, it's really the main topic is the awareness raising.
Okay, thank you. We have Rayna with us. Hello, Rayna. Good to have you with us. The quick same two questions to you. Question number one, which Sheila answered while you were still in the dark alleyways of the internet, lost somewhere, but we have you back. That's great. Question number one is, could you just tell our audience, those who may eventually not yet know you, although you are one of the good old friends of the Luxembourg Internet Days, who you are and what your involvement with NIS is? And then the second question is, as you know, that we will try to focus our discussion this afternoon a little more on the SME side of life and not always speak about the big players who, well, if I oversimplify in a journalistic way, just put the budget there and then NIS is off the board. So who are you, what is your involvement, and what is your feeling as to implementation of the NIS at an SME level?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I would really much more prefer to be back in person, but we'll need to wait for next year.
We too, I can tell you.
Yeah, I guess so. So apologies for the glitch. I'm traveling, so it's been a little bit of a mess. So what I do is I do a lot of public affairs consulting and cybersecurity consulting, and basically I remember the first time I spoke at the Luxembourg Internet Days a few years ago to basically talk about the very first version of NIS, of the NIS Directive. I know I'm glad to be back to talk about the second one. And what happened basically last year is that I got involved as well in the revision workshops for the NIS Directive. And I'm also following pretty much and working with a few elected members of parliament on a few glitches and a few interesting aspects of the NIS Directive, since it pertains pretty much to day-to-day operational work in cybersecurity. And we should not forget that our elected officials are not cybersecurity specialists. So yeah, I've seen from an implementer point of view the NIS Directive #1. And I was really humbled to be participating to the revision workshops last year and to be following the modifications and the negotiations in Parliament since last year, basically. And it's an interesting question you have there on SMEs, because even the big ones weren't really on board with the NIS directive, well, because it's a directive. And so depending on the transposition velocity, if you like, of the different member states, it may have taken more, or less time to issue decrees and things like this. And then there were a lot of imprecise recommendations that people just struggled with what to do out of them. And as far as I can remember, there weren't so many SMEs concerned in the first version, which is quite probably going to change in the second version. But I think we'll need to discuss this a little longer, in the coming questions, especially in terms of verticals, because they're, the version 2 of the directive aims at providing a general, general provisions, and is also expanding on the sectors that are concerned by the directive itself, which brings other questions, such as if we already have vectoral or sectoral, if you like, legislation, what do we do with that? Yeah, but okay. I'm not gonna spoil the question that you're gonna come up with.
How do you know what kind of questions I will be asking? Not to you.
No, I know you've prepared, so.
You don't say. Thank you for that. You were speaking about glitches on the one side, and you were also speaking about different speeds of implementation on the country sides of NIS. Do I have to understand that as meaning that also from the regulators or from the government side, NIS was perceived to be a roadblock rather than an opportunity? Or is it an opportunity?
It is always an opportunity, anything is an opportunity if we are optimistic enough. No, I mean, joke aside, we should really remember the context. The NIS directive was the very first, European level framework to talk about cyber. So you can't expect the things, magically to go at the same pace in the different member states, right? And also the fact that it's a directive also may have seen as something that doesn't necessarily push people to be more, or encourages them, if you like, to be to follow more closely the different provisions, because as a reminder, it's not a regulation, it's a directive, meaning it sets up a common objective. Mm-hmm. How you attain that objective is up to you. That's what the directive basically brings about in the EU. So as much as this is very interesting from a member state point of view, because all the member states have different histories, different, local legislations, this can also kind of impede, if you like, on the more fluid adoption of those provisions. So that's where also you have a lot of, there is an idiom that came about a lot in the discussions during the workshops, which was lex specialis, meaning specific national legislation that may or may not concern sectoral activity, and that is also very specific to the member states, and that you don't find elsewhere in the EU. So those are like the different glitches that we needed to, kind of overcome altogether as a community. And that, I think, well, at least I hope, will be, removed, so to speak, in the second version.
Okay. Let me bounce back on what you said and address that question to Sheila. Are we then not eventually better off with NIS II putting that one in the framework of a regulation rather than a directive? Because everything which we can have, which helps us move forward on the data single market, that's a big concept, obviously, but we are moving into that direction. Wouldn't that be easier then to help us get closer to that data single market if we had a regulation rather than a directive? Let's not be too technical about this because this is regulatory more than operational, but just a question to you.
So for regulation, it's of course then you don't have a lot of flexibility because you don't need to do a transposition, that's clear. But on the other hand, the issue that you have if you have a regulation is that you actually are bound by the whole European view, but like for Luxembourg is a specific country. We are quite small. So this could not necessarily, or would not necessarily mean that it's easy applicable in Luxembourg. So if you have a regulation setting boundaries and setting like thresholds which operators are to be included, this could actually lead to the fact that at some point, even though operators might be critical for the functioning of Luxembourg, it doesn't mean that it is would fit the thresholds in a regulation. So that's why I think a directive is better suited, because it also gives like a minimum harmonization. So you can still do more if you want to, but you have to keep it at least at what the directive is saying. Of course, there's some level of interpretation, like we saw with the identification process of operators. So I think, and I would like to come back to what Rayna said on the SMEs. Actually, I think it's the other way around, that within the NIS I, the SMEs were more considered than for the NIS II, because you have this automatically, the current proposal of the NIS II excluding small and micro companies, which the size, you can argue about it, not necessarily the size is a criticality point, but yeah, so that's the proposal. And when it comes for sectoral legislation, I think it is important to have some parts being, of course, seen separately to the NIS, but then again, it needs to have an European view. It's not good to do some national sectorial legislation, and I think in the second proposal, it is removed that you can have a national sectoral lex specialis, but it's at least then a European specifics. So the idea of NIS II, same as for the NIS I, is to have like a horizontal approach, and then you might still have some sectorial specificities.
Rayna, you want to bounce back on things which Sheila said?
Yeah, I was trying to unmute myself. Yeah, thanks. But what she just said is precisely because it's precisely why, you know, the discussion we had about regulation or directive, because that discussion came up very early in the revision workshops. You know, that was one of the main questions in the beginning. Should we, to ensure, you know, better adoption of this framework, should we change the legislative vehicle? And a lot of people were like, yeah, should we stick to a regulation? People will be much more obliged to do what it says. However, you know, there is a big difference between France or Germany and Luxembourg or Bulgaria, you know, in terms of maturity, in terms of practice, in terms of actors that are concerned. And, you know, and what Sheila was just saying was very demonstrative of this, you know, because you don't have, I don't know, there is no SAP in France, for example. There is no SAP in Bulgaria either. But, you know, you could, or in Luxembourg, or you could have like sectoral stuff that is like, for example, for maritime security. You don't have that sort of things elsewhere, you know, in every member state. So there are things that you can't just abide by just because it's in a, you know, in a legal norm. Mm-hmm. So you need, and that's why basically we stick to a directive, because again, the idea is to have a minimum level of security, and how you achieve this, that's in the national legislation that it will be set. And there is a very interesting place given in the directive to, and a huge encouragement, if you like, to developing and devising a national cybersecurity strategy that is basically something that the country, with its own, you know, economic network and so on and so forth, puts forward for itself that is coherent with the minimal harmonization of the NIS directive, but it allows every member state to basically do as best as it can with its own, ecosystem and so on and so forth. So that's why, I was a big proponent of the regulation thing, to be completely honest. And then, I heard other people like Sheila talk about, the subtleties of that sort of thing. And it made me think and change my mind, basically. So yeah, that's in a nutshell.
Security needs a compromise to be, it's not compromisable, but it needs a compromise on the regulatory side so as to move forward. A question to Sheila. One thing which was mentioned this morning by Commissioner Gabriel in her address to the Luxembourg Internet Days 2021 was digital skills. Do you have a feeling, or have you seen or experienced at the level of ILR that the digital skill set has improved among the addressees of the directive, of the NIS directive? You were speaking about awareness building. So in the context of that awareness building, did you see that?
Yeah, I saw that many operators, of course, have a dedicated person to the cybersecurity domain. But even if they don't, at least they have like one point of contact you have to contact in case of a question or an issue on cybersecurity. So I think it is not, I said, cyber skills has many different levels. It's not only the technical side, because there you can also do probably some outsourcing, but it's also the whole governance structure, the management of the company, the policies and things like that. So I think having a awareness raising and a management body is very, very important in order to get an augmented cyber skill in the company anyways.
Rayna.
Yeah, we do need, we do need to do a lot more and a lot better in terms of skill building. But when I say we, it's not you, me, or, or specific companies. It's we as a society, because it's a whole of society issue. Still, the directive does not necessarily provide provisions that, specifically relate to skill building. I guess because it's not the place to do that from one side, but also because there are already pre-existing European frameworks for that topic, and ENISA is also taking up on this. And I think you are also aware of the European Cyber Competence Center, which is also, an entity that will be specifically looking at that challenge that we face as a society again. So there isn't much to say, to say it nicely. What there is, and it hasn't really been used in the past, which is a pity, is a specific financial wallet, if you like, that can be solicited by specific organizations that fall under the definitions, of the directive, and which can also be used to help internally upskill or reskill, talents. So this, we need to, I guess, raise better awareness about those instruments that exist in the directive itself, but that very few actors seem to be aware of. So that's something where we can improve, collectively, like from people who are kind of aware of the text. That can be a help.
Okay.
If I may,
Yeah,
I would
go on.
just like to add that, I mean, overall, it's known to everyone that there's a lack of personnel or people who are in the domain, working in the domain in cybersecurity. So you cannot talk about reskilling or upskilling if you do not talk about, and I'm taking the other hat on myself, talk about women in cybersecurity. It's very important to take the fear of women to approach the domain. There are many, yeah, just many people, many women who are actually afraid because they think it's too technical, because they have like a self-esteem issues, even though they are would be like top candidates for it. And that's something we need to address definitely in the future more than we did until now.
Yeah,
Absolutely,
I
Rayna.
completely second this. Yeah, I completely second this. I mean, we have different challenges that seem to kind of befall on the, say, female population of the domain. You know, we need people to enter the field, but we also need them to, you know, be happy in the field. And, you know, we have that issue where for um, women professionals who have, you know, who struggle already with anything that, you know, Sheila just mentioned, we also have that challenge of providing career paths, career journeys that are interesting, you know, for people, and that also take into account their own experience. Like, take, you know, a case that happens pretty often. Someone with, I don't know, legal background would be very interested to come in cyber, but this person quite often will be seen as a junior. So that person will be given junior tasks and a junior salary, but that person, it's not her first rodeo, right? It's that person has another experience. She may have managed a team in the past. She has a different point of view. She has different knowledge from her previous experiences. How do we, you know, build upon this, and how do we make those people welcome, and how do we, you know, let them grow basically? You know, without, because they may be young in the field, but they are not young, you know, professionally speaking.
Yep,
So the
yep.
question is, you know, how do we allow people to grow in that field, which is so rich in opportunities and in skill sets and so on? Um, this is also another challenge that is way beyond, you know, the NIS directive or any directive you may imagine.
Yes,
But
yes, we
yeah,
are
thank you, Sheila,
somewhat
for
out of
bringing that.
topic and time flies. So let me ask my last question, because we could go on and on and on about this. Um, the directive is currently under review. I mean, you alluded to that, Rayna. So we are going to face one day or another a NIS II directive. Now, I'm not going to ask you why it is under review, because we know that that is a common process with technical directives, etc., etc., that every XYZ years they are subject to review. But if you had to express a wish, you sit in front of a crystal ball and you could tell the crystal ball what you would like to see in NIS II being covered, being better done than eventually it was in NIS, what would that be? Sheila, Rayna?
Well, if I would have like a wishing, like a wand to a wizard, I would actually appreciate if we could have a world in which we don't need to have a regulation or a directive on it, where everyone would have enough awareness, and I feel like I'm always using the word awareness, but like in every company, every citizen, every person who has a smartphone, a PC, would have enough knowledge, enough awareness to just apply security enough so that there would not need to be an regulation or a directive on it. But talking about the directive, there are some parts that are already better, so it's more like on information sharing, and I think we would way more need to focus on the communication between the competent authority and the operators, and also the training of the personnel and all kind of levels of the personnel, not only like the top management, but all the secretary, those who are just, you know, cleaning, whatever. Every person, everybody needs to have some basic training at least, and I think that would be something I would like to see in the directive.
Okay, thank you. Rayna?
Yeah, now I'm left with the difficult task, you know, to say something that is, you know, so there are different ways, different things that are new in the version 2. You have supply chains that is new, and you also have enforcement tools that is quite new, so to speak. So what I would like to see is perhaps better oversights and a better collaboration between the concerned actors, the national authorities, the private sector, and really much less drama, but much more basically information sharing, as Sheila said, and much more also experience sharing on how did we go through that incident or that crisis or whatnot, and a much more coherent work together, because it's a common challenge. So it won't just magically solve itself because we have a directive. It needs to have teeth, and it needs to also kind of make people understand that this is important to all of us, because me, we are all someone else's end user. So that's, that level of understanding that we need to reach.
Absolutely. That was a perfect final word, Rayna. Thank you. Specifically, the information sharing part, which I heard from both of you ladies. And again, thank you for having shared your time and given your time and shared your competence with us this afternoon. There's one item which you said, which is very important, that is the interaction between the operators or the people, the companies subject to cybersecurity regulations, the regulator on the other side, but also the community as such, because it is basically swarm knowledge which will help us all grow into that. And on the interaction between the companies and the regulator, just for those who are watching us and listening to us today, we will have a very interesting panel discussion tomorrow afternoon, which will involve a representative of the FBI and who has plenty of experience on how to proactive and constructively exchange between the private sector, the government sector, and regulation or law enforcement. So I would like to invite you all to join that session, which is going to be quite an extraordinary session, I believe. Ladies, again, thank you very much for your very charming smiles, for your input, for everything you're contributing to the Luxembourg Internet Days on an ongoing way. So thank you again, and hopefully see you during some other session or next year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.